Hey guys, Tech Commander coming to you today with another repair. Today we have a damaged HDMI port replacement for a PlayStation 4. First we'll start by removing the hard drive cover and the hard drive caddy. The caddy is held in by a Phillips head screw. After removing the caddy, the rest of the screws are pretty much T8 and T10 screws. After removing the bottom housing, you'll come across the power supply, which is held in by 2 Phillips head screws and 3 T8 screws. After that, you remove the data and power cable for the Blu-ray drive, flip it over and start removing the 2 Phillips head screws for the APU, and then the rest of the screws on the frames are T8 screws. Remove those and put them to the side. At this point, remove your board and you should be able to see the damage done. I like to clean up the little excess thermal paste that's on the APU so I don't get it all over my hand. Not all HDMI port repairs are created equally. I ended up having to repair that the port was completely broken off of the board. So I've added flux to the board. At this point I'm just tinning my soldering iron, getting it ready so that I can drag it across these pins. The flux will make it easier for the solder to stick to the pads. As you can see here, I'm just dragging the soldering iron across those pins and they're becoming nice and shiny. So the reasoning for mixing in the new solder with the old solder is just to get it up off the board. I use a desoldering braid here, just heat that up and run that right across the pins. This will remove all the solder that was originally on that. I did originally put solder inside these grounding ports, but being that they are a ground, they do take a lot of heat. So I'll be switching over to hot air removal for those. So right here I have turned on my heat gun. I am heating the bottom side of the board. You want to be careful because there are chips underneath there, but all I'm doing is just heating up around the area of the HDMI port, trying to get those grounding holes. So what I'm doing here is as I heat up the bottom of the board, the solder will melt. When it gets to its melting point, I'm using a vacuum tool to pull the solder from those holes. Now that those are clear, I'll be adding new flux to these pads. And just like before, I'm dragging the solder right across all these pads. I'm going back over all of these pads, trying to make a nice pillowy look to these solder pads. This way when I add the HDMI port, they sit on top of it. So once it's heated, the port itself, all those pins will fall right into these pillowy pads and make perfect connection. Now just clean up all that old flux with a Q-tip and some 99% isopropyl alcohol. If you can, you probably find 91% inside your local Walmart. Just get all of that flux off there because it is corrosive to the board. After cleaning up, you want to add your HDMI port. You want to check the alignment. Make sure that your pins from your port are lining up with those solder blobs. Now, after making sure all the pins are aligned, remove your port, add some fresh flux, because now we're going to put it in its place. I tend to add flux to the grounding holes because we are going to put solder in there as well. Now we'll add our HDMI port back. Just get ready to start heating it up. Now we'll heat the bottom of the board, just trying to get up to temperature. It is a thick board, so it will take some time in order for it to get to its optimal temperature in order to melt this solder. What I'd like to do is start off by soldering the ground points. I'm just tapping the solder to the port itself. Once it gets hot enough, it will start to melt. I employ this technique because it does technically pull all the solder through to the bottom of the board itself, right through the port. There's a slight gap, so it does go all the way through, and this way it's knowing that the port itself is hot enough and the board is hot, so it's going to get a nice good joint there. Once I'm finished with this side, I'll do the same to the other. You always want to make sure these ground points are nice and tight because that's where your weak point is. After all that heating, I like to go over, heat the entire bottom of that HDMI port. At this point, I'm going to start putting pressure on top of the HDMI port so that the pins themselves will fall into those nice pillowy solder joints. Just applying downward pressure. This way I know once everything is finished, it's going to cool, and just keep it in its place. I'll remove the heat. It's smoking a little, but just let it cool for a while. Just keep applying a downward pressure. Don't move too much. It'll cool off, and then you'll have a nice solid joint. So after all that's done, I like to go over my solder joints just to make sure there's no movement. I am looking under a microscope, and I'm using the tweezers to push on every little point that's there, just so I can find out if there's any movement. May have to touch anything up, but usually doing this route, using the whole pillow method, pushing down, adding the force, you usually have no issues. Because I am a good person and do care about my customers' devices, I do clean up everything. Usually these PlayStations, they do end up, becoming very dusty, and especially this is an original console, so this person's had it for at least, 5 years. So clean everything up, get all the dust out, remove the heat sink, remove the fan itself. I like to blow out the fan with some compressed air, vacuum it up a little, just make sure the cooling itself is all proper. Wipe down the APU, add some fresh thermal paste, and just throw the board right back in. Just do everything backwards, APU clamps down, screw down the top shield itself, and let's keep going from there. Over here, I did forget to add the cable for the Blu-ray drive, but I did go back in and put it in before everything else was done. Now after everything's put together, plug it up, test it out. Test the Wi-Fi function, test the controller's wireless functions, make sure everything's in there, everything's connected. The original PS4 only has 2G, it does not connect to 5G networks. And there you have it. It connects to the Wi-Fi, everything's good to go. This customer will be happy. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe. If you didn't like it, comment. I'll see you in the next one.